right there.
Hi, I was wondering about just like for Cataclysm, there was like 3 raids that came in like straight from the expansion, and right after that we had Firelands, and it was only like 7 bosses compared to the 12 we had before, or 13 if you want to do heroic. But you know, so I was just wondering, like, have you guys thought about maybe like some way to make it seem like this, so it's not overwhelming in like the initial part of it with 3 raid dungeons and then just 7 bosses in there? That seems a little like you're too focused on one raid for a long period of time, and one, yeah, so it's like 2 sides of a spectrum. Is there going to be like a middle in the next expansion or something? You know?
Right now, we're talking about having what, 6, 5, and 5, I think.
6, 5, and 2.
Yeah, 6, 5, and 2. So something pretty similar, like 14 bosses on launch in the same way. But we're still not sure how many of the world raid bosses we want to do that are going to be in the exterior world. So we're going to have raid bosses like that as well. But definitely we want that to not feel like it's such a big jump, you know, all the time, where maybe one time you get 7, then you get 13, then you get 5. Essentially, the number of bosses comes down to, we need to have enough bosses to distribute loot correctly. You know, there's kind of a minimum number we have to make sure that we can spread the loot around. But other than that, I mean, it just comes down to the time of us being able to get a patch out with the number of bosses that we think feels right for that zone.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, hi, I would like to ask a question about the classic dungeons to see if there was ever going to be another one, kind of like Heroic Stockades, like Hogger. Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
You know, it might be like in the future, like via patch, we might do more classics like we did Zul'Aman, Zul'Gurub in patches. You know, they're a lot of fun to do for us. I mean, they're really well received by the community.
We love doing those.
Right. I mean, everyone loves Hogger. I mean, so, you know, we'll see.
I mean, a cool fact, actually, originally, Dead Mines and Shadowfang Keep were supposed to be for patch 4.1. They weren't even originally in launch. And all of us on the dev team thought it was so awesome.
Yeah.
We were just like, no, we've got to get these in for launch because they're just too cool. So I think it just, you know, that's the kind of thing, whenever we have time, if we can get one in and it feels like it's going to fit, it's something we want to do.
Thank you.
Hello. So when you guys announced 4.3, you announced that there was only going to be 7 bosses, but that you were going to focus a lot more on making sure that the bosses felt more epic and more, that you put more work into them.
Right.
And I know this is just my opinion, but I didn't really feel like the bosses were anything special. And so when it came down to it, Firelands really only felt like half a raid. And then with the, 4.3 is already on the test realms, it felt like you guys kind of felt like we need to push this next patch out right away, so let's nerf all these bosses so guilds can get through it and we can push out the next patch. And I didn't really like that, so I was just wondering, is this something we can expect to see in the next, raid tiering in Mists of Pandaria?
That's certainly not the reason why those bosses were nerfed at all. It doesn't have anything to do with timeline. It has everything to do with, we want as many people as possible to experience that content. So we were looking at the number of people that were getting kills on the raid bosses, and it was extremely small. And for all the work that everyone puts into something like that, that's why we did the hot fixes right away instead of waiting, because we want to get that content to as many people as possible. And that's definitely why you saw that. So really the issue there is us probably over-tuning those bosses to begin with, and that might come off a different way, but it's certainly not about us trying to rush and get to the next content and making sure guilds are ready.
Yeah, and the 4-3 raids, the Death of Wing stuff, extremely epic. It'll be, you guys haven't seen a corrupted Deathwing fight on PTR yet, but when you guys do, you'll be blown away.
Thank you. That's what. Oh.
Thank you for making a fantastic game.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, come on up.
For competitive raiders, have you thought about separating the difference between 10 and 25, since there's a difficulty difference in the way that it's set up for server first achievements?
We've discussed it.
Yeah.
That's certainly something. There are some differences between 10 and 25, like difficulties on heroic. It depends on for some raids, the 10s were harder. Like some of the initial Cataclysm raids, some of those 10 heroics were really, really hard. And vice versa. In Firelands, the 25 ones ended up being harder. It's hard for us to. it's difficult to actually keep those perfectly balanced. There's usually one that's like a little bit easier than others. So that's something we've talked about, and can't make any promises, but we'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, so you were talking how challenge modes can be done for dungeons. Are they also going to be for raids? And also, are they all going to be unlocked immediately? Or is it going to be like you have to do 10 to unlock the next tier and then 15 to do the next tier, things like that?
There's a chance we could do them for raids. We want to start with dungeons and see how they work out and see if they're popular and get a chance to tune them and have them feel right. Raids aren't out of the picture. As far as the unlocking, there's one thing we didn't really mention, but we've been talking about, like, once you get, like, say you get the gold medal, right? After that, we've talked about then actually the item level of your gear could get nerfed by, like, say 5%. And then you could have a chance to run it again, almost like a prestige mode kind of thing, right? And if you beat that, then we could drop your gear by 10% and then 15%. So not only would there just be those 3 levels, you know, you could kind of keep going depending on your skill level. You know, that's another way that we could possibly unlock so you could do more. We just kind of haven't finalized that yet, to be honest.
Thank you.
I feel like one of the strengths of being able to have 2 raids on a single tier usually comes with giving the raiders a choice as to how they will progress through content.
Right.
Like they can choose, oh, we want to focus on this string of bosses to get to the end at the beginning of this week, or we can focus on this string of bosses to get to the end this week. Whereas a single raid can seem to burden you toward getting to the end at times. Have you considered maybe having a single raid where if you have progressed through you have progressed through 2 sides of the dungeon, like with heroics, you have defeated both of these 2 bosses. Later on, you can simply progress through one side to get to the end boss and maybe have a little more time to work on him without having to slug through as many bosses week after week.
We're actually talking about that, and it came up because something we haven't really talked about with looking for raid is, so for Dragon Soul's 8 bosses, but the way looking for raid works is you don't choose all of Dragon Soul, because doing 8 bosses in one night, you know, and looking for raid, that's a very long time commitment. So
Big commitment.
It's a huge commitment. So it actually breaks it up. It does actually break it up into two halves. There's the first 4 bosses, and if you beat the last boss of those 4, you get the big valor reward. And same thing after you've beaten those, you can choose the second half, and then it breaks it up. And again, trying to keep the content to smaller chunks. So along with that, potentially, if we're going to end up building in those doors, those back doors, Karazhan had the back door that was halfway up, and that's something I think we're starting to think more about the logistics of getting raids through, and that's something that might happen in the future.
That's it. I got to keep moving. I can't.
My infection. I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Preston Wolf, my fellow tank. He couldn't be here because he had to get eye surgery. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, you guys. We got about 5 minutes, so just enough time for a couple more questions.
At last year's Blizzcon and all throughout Cataclysm, you hinted and showed a bunch of artwork for Abyssal Maw Raid, but never released it. Do you have any plans, and what happened to that?
We don't have any plans to release Abyssal Maw Raid at this point. What Abyssal Maw was it was a raid we were talking about doing for Cataclysm that was going to fit into Vashir, and it ended up, it turned out that the storyline that we were telling within that raid and the boss that we were going to use didn't fit with where we were going for the patch cycle. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with it or we were trying to not do it on purpose. It just ended up not fitting. We ended up having better ideas for some other stuff we wanted to do, so we actually lost all that. The concept art is about as far as we had gotten on it was concept, which we showed at BlizzCon last year. All that was just basically throwaway work at that point. But from a story perspective, we've kind of moved on from Cataclysm, so I don't think we're going to go back to it. But that's what happened. We just ended up not using it because we had something better.
Thank you.
All right, for your new dungeon challenges, you're going to be reducing people's item level to a certain level. I wanted to know how you were going to handle the secondary stats like hit and expertise, since those also get lowered, and people just take those to the caps and then they stop. So the lower geared people are still going to be at their caps, whereas the higher geared people, they're just going to get that flat chopped off the top, and will actually suffer the DPS loss from that.
That's a good point, and that's something we'll certainly have to work out. There's a lot of other like little details like that, like how do we handle trinkets.
We have top men working on a solution for that.
Very much so. We have faith in these top men.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
In other words, don't worry.
And
Okay, real quick, one more, guys.
Hi, what's going on? I was just wondering how in Oldar and Heroic Lich King, like when you did Zero Light and you did Heroic Lich King, you would get Invincible and you would get the no-head mount. It was 100% on hard mode. But in Firelands, you guys made normal mode people get the Firehawk mount, and it made people like who got Firelord. It was just kind of like a bummer that you can see like these noobs or whatever riding around on mounts that you get to kind of work for to get it, Like, do you plan on like continuing doing that, or do you want to just give these awesome mounts to people who don't deserve it?
Oh,
I think.
Goodness. Now, on Heroic, you did get them every single time you killed him, and on Normal, I don't think that was the case.
Event.
So, you were rewarded more, but as far as actual, like...
And it's a different color.
Oh, it's a different color. Yeah, so...
That's part of the reason with Raid Finder that we're going to be separating out so that the mounts like that are only going to come from Normal and Heroic and aren't going to come from Raid Finder, because Raid Finder is kind of what we're looking at as an intro to raiding for most people. That's why, like we were talking about earlier, all those prestige items are going to stay in Normal and Heroic modes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. That's it for Q&A.
Thanks,
guys.
Just like water there.
Thank you for attending the World of Warcraft Dungeons and Raids panel. Up next, Diablo 3.